Really excited to spend a little bit of time with everyone today, talking about the work that we do. Really happy that I have four such wonderful colleagues joining me in this presentation. So just a quick overview is that I'm going to do like a 15 to 20 minute presentation that's really broad. With Friday Forum, you never know who's going to come. So I tried to keep the presentation really broad to all disciplines, people that maybe have had experience with grants before, people who haven't had any experience with grants. So I'm going to do that presentation, and then following that, I'll turn it over to my faculty colleagues to share a little bit about the grants they've received and the experience they've had and the impact that that's had on their research and their careers. So I'll go ahead and start my slideshow, and we'll get going here. So, okay. So I'm going to start out by talking just a little bit about what my office does here at Gettysburg College. So as Jen mentioned, that we're a staff of 3. So it's myself, Katie Weigel, and Vicki Slaybaugh. And the things you see on the slide here are things that we're responsible for. The first thing is what I kind of consider matchmaking. So we find funders whose mission aligns with Gettysburg College's mission and goals, and funders that align with particular faculty members' research interests. We bring together campus partners through institutional proposal development, encourage innovative ideas, and assist with writing of institutional proposals. We support faculty-sponsored research. So what you might find at a bigger institution as a sponsored projects office, we do that as well. That includes conducting funder searches, sharing grant writing tips and resources, suggesting a proposal timeline, acting as a liaison with the funding source, helping to prepare the budget, editing proposals, and ensuring that proposals are complete and submitted on time. As far as stewardship goes, I mean, really that's where funders want to know that we did what we said we were going to do. And so as part of that, we include post-award accounting and financial reports, and Katie in my office really helps to manage that process. We're also responsible for federal grant compliance. So if you have federal funding, you know that there's things like the Fly America Act and conflict of interest and just a whole bunch of policies to take into consideration. And then we also are responsible for crowdfunding initiatives at the college, which we can touch on a bit later if we have time. So here's just, a sense of the volume of submissions we have at Gettysburg College on a typical year. You'll see, anywhere from 25 to 30 faculty submissions and about 10 to 15 institutional submissions per fiscal year. So really 101 here, but what's a grant? And the biggest thing I think I want everyone to take away from this slide is that, grants are not typically for operational support. They have very specific purposes, and the application lengths, requirements, formats, and deadlines really vary by funder. So, everything is a case-by-case basis with grant seeking. So 2 primary types of grants I'm going to focus on today, foundation grants, and the following slide will be on government grants. The biggest thing about foundation grants is that, they don't give out of loyalty to the college, right? I mean, they weren't an alum, they didn't go here, they don't have a sense of loyalty to Gettysburg College. They support Gettysburg College because they see an institution that's advancing one of their areas of interest. So they're not so much worried about what are our areas of interest, but what are their areas of interest. The other thing I want to note about foundations is that it can take a really long time to establish a relationship with a foundation. Particular example, it took someone 22 months from the time of a first visit with a foundation to landing a grant, and it was only a $50,000 grant. So just to point out that, the relationship building with foundations is very important as well. As far as government grants go, the biggest thing I'll say about government grants is the benefit is that you typically can receive reviewer comments. It's not always the case with private foundation grants. And so the great thing about, the government is funded by taxpayer dollars. And so they really are supposed to be responsive. And so I find that to be a great benefit about government grants is that you can receive feedback on your proposal. So why are grants important to the institution? I have a few reasons on the slide here. There's other reasons as well. But the main thing I'd like to say is that, a proposal is a public statement about what matters to you, what matters to our institution. We put our plans in writing for public review and evaluation by our peers and experts in the field. Additionally, grants are often really valuable for piloting programs. You can try something out, and then if it works, maybe sustain it with institutional funds or sustain it with other philanthropic support. So when should you think about seeking a grant? These are just a few reasons on the slide, but I'll note here, I said 6 months before sabbatical or research travel, but I would even start thinking about it sometimes as early as a year before you're going to need the funding. As an example, like Fulbright, you have to apply a full year before you would want to go anywhere. So you really have to be thinking ahead on these things. The other main reason is just really if you need more money than what you can receive internally through an RPD grant. So how do I know if it's a good idea? The main things I'd focus on here are, is it an idea that no one else has tried? Have you done a literature review to make sure? Does your idea fill a gap? Are you proposing a new technique in your teaching or building on a proven practice using a new twist? Can you apply your research skills to a timely topic that funders want to support? And in that manner, I would say, an example is really digital humanities. Like digital humanities were really hot. And so can you take what you're doing and apply digital humanities techniques to it? That's something that gets funders' attention sometimes. And then finally, are you viewed as an active part of the conversation in your discipline? And by that, I'm really talking about publications. Do you have a publication record to contribute that shows that you're actually going to complete the work? So grant seeking 101. These are really just like the basic steps of starting to think about submitting a proposal and bringing it to completion. So the first thing I often recommend is that people write a one-page summary that they would be comfortable sharing with a program officer. And I even have that I could share with folks like a list of questions you can ask program officers when you have that initial contact. Read abstracts of previously funded projects or even full proposals. And I have, samples. I'm definitely happy to help people find those resources. Start early. Remember that it's not creative writing. You have to follow the guidelines exactly. Establish your credibility. Brag a little bit. Why are you the right person to complete this project? Establish feasibility, showing that you will complete the project. Focus specifically on the funder's review criteria, and proofread. Ask 2 colleagues to read your proposal, one that's in your field and one that's not. The final thing I'll say about this is really that my office is here to help you with all of this. We will help you create a timeline, we'll help you get the institutional information you need, create your budget, read your drafts, help you gather letters of support. So you don't need to do this all alone. Now, some of this under peer review tips might seem a little basic or a little silly, but these are really important things to think about. Oftentimes, if your proposal is going through peer review, it could be being read by a reviewer who's tired, grumpy, hungry, has been working all day and now has 30 proposals to read. And so I think it's important to just make your proposal as reviewer friendly as you possibly can. So follow the agency format for headings and fonts, leave white space on the page. Don't make your font size too small. Use repetition and be clear about what you're going to do during the grant period. Don't try to do too much during one grant period. And again, like a few more tips, just being careful not to use overused and cliche words, being really specific, and making sure you refer to others working in your field. So this slide is not meant to scare anyone. It's rather meant to encourage people to submit their best work and be willing to resubmit. And there's also, a little bit of luck involved in all of this. In 2017, NSF proposals worth a total of $4 billion were rejected simply because they were beyond the organization's budget, even though reviewers had rated them as very good or excellent. So the point here is be willing to resubmit and seek feedback when you can. It's often said that it can take as many as 3 times to be successful on a grant. So one way of overcoming low funding rates is to do a great job of explaining why your project is important. And no matter what funder we're talking about, one of the main things I always see is that people are really focused on significance. What is the significance of your project? You'll see that in review criteria quite often. So, 3 main funders, NSF, NIH, and NEH. I'm going to just share a little bit about what their significance criteria is. So the NSF says that what is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different disciplines? The NIH says, does the project address an important problem or a barrier to progress in the field? The NEH says, tell the evaluators why the project is important and how it will change the field. So you can see, like, across all 3 very different funders, the importance of significance and explaining why your project is so important. And here I have a slide that I took directly from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, but they had this whole presentation on, common reviewer criticisms. And again, we're going back to really explaining why your work will make a difference in your field. And maybe, so if you're looking at NEH, why will it make a difference in your particular field, but then also in the humanities more broadly? And this is a quote that I kind of always use in my presentations, but all grant makers have the same goal, a finished product about which they can proudly say, our money helped to produce this. They also want to know how you'll prove whether the project is a success. And so that's when we are talking about evaluation. So how does it work? The final thing I just want to share here is that we have a grants guidebook on our website. It walks you through every step of the grant seeking process. We also have lists of common funders. We have databases. We have lists of who's been funded at Gettysburg College. So we have a lot of resources on this grants guidebook. And so I'm happy to meet with anyone one-on-one to talk about their project, but also, know that we do have some resources on the web as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our faculty panel. It's kind of a panel. It's kind of just taking turns talking. And so I have 4 faculty colleagues joining me today that Jen mentioned: Carolyn Hartzell, Kerry Wallach, Hakim Williams, and Ryan Kearney. And so I'm going to actually start with Carolyn and ask her to start us off and thinking about, the impact that grants have had on her work. You're muted, Carolyn. Oh, Carolyn, you're muted.
Sorry, I teach with never unmuting myself, and so I always forget to do it. I just wanted to thank Laura for putting this together and all of you for being here. And again, the message from all of us is to really encourage you to apply for grants. And I guess we'll all speak to why we think that's a good idea. I think also Laura chose us because we each represent a different division at the college. So me from the social sciences, Hakim will be, I guess, more interdisciplinary, and Kerry humanities, and Ryan sciences. So I'll be talking about grants that apply especially to the social sciences. In terms of my grant seeking experience, I guess my very first one was as a graduate student. I got a Fulbright to do my dissertation research in which I did in Columbia. I didn't apply for another grant then for years, not until actually after I was tenured at Gettysburg College. And that might be one issue we want to talk about. I just kind of felt like I couldn't invest the time in that kind of activity at that time, that I was more focused on publications that I could do with the materials I had at hand. But once I did have tenure, I did feel like I could make that trade-off and invest more time in initially looking kind of at the world of grants and what was out there. Although with time, you kind of know what's out there and what applies more to you. But then, taking the actual time to do it. So the first grant I applied for was an NSF, and I did not get it. I applied jointly with someone else and we did not get the NSF. And after getting over the part about being bitter and angry, we looked back at it and realized that we'd actually learned a lot from the process of doing it and from our failure to get the grant. Sometime later, along with this same person who's from another institution, we applied for a second NSF grant, and that one we were successful in getting, and that helped fund a big survey in Mindanao in the Philippines on conflict resolution issues. So another grant that I applied for successfully was with the U.S. Institute of Peace, which funded me to be a Jennings Randolph Senior Fellow at USIP down in D.C. for a year time. So it bought me out of a year at Gettysburg College. And then right now I have 2 grants, which have been slowed down because of the pandemic, from something called Folk Bernadotte Academy, which is the Swedish government agency for peace, security, and development. So that's kind of interesting because I'm being funded by a foreign country in this case. One of those grants is for a conjoint experiment in Nepal, also relating to conflict resolution issues. And the other one is to actually hold a workshop at Gettysburg, which obviously has been delayed by the pandemic, but which I hope could happen within the next year. I guess what I'd say about the grants that I've gotten is I think they're kind of 2 very different categories. One category, like the NSF and the FB, at least one of the FBA grants, the one for Nepal, are definitely grants that help me get my research done, right? So they give me money that they've given me money that I couldn't have accessed, for example, through the college to go and carry out field work or large scale surveys and the like abroad. The other kind of grant, like the USIP grant or Fulbright's, are what I think of as, I mean, they can help you get research done as well, but they put you in a context that is one where, for example, you really get the opportunity to expand your networks. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do that with NSF grants and the like, but being somewhere like at U.S. Institute of Peace and the Jennings Randolph Senior Fellowship brought together people from all over the world. So there were about 20 of us who were senior fellows at that time. And you just really get the opportunity to interact with all these other people, establish networks. Being in DC, we were right across from the State Department once we moved into the new building, which is the building they're in now, connecting to people. And those kind of grants can also open up new opportunities for you. So during my year at USIP, for example, unexpectedly, I got invited to participate in a project that took me to Afghanistan. I got invited to participate in another project that took me to Colombia. So those kinds of grants are ones that I think of as being ones that can help you expand your networks, as well as maybe actually getting you the time to do your research. Let's see, what other points did I have here that I was going to emphasize? Definitely in terms of the grant writing, I mean, the whole process, right, is a time commitment. It is definitely an investment. But I guess what I'm saying by this is it's one where you learn a lot about other people that are in your, out there doing this kind of work, because you have to be able to say, as Laura said, what you're doing differently or what you're doing new. So in addition to kind of your normal scholarly work where you're reading other people's work and the like, this makes you think in a much more concentrated manner about what's going on in the discipline. And I think that can be really valuable. And the other thing I would say is I would encourage people, and again, this is probably when you're a little further on in your career, but I would encourage people to volunteer to review for groups. NSF is always looking for reviewers, for example, and you can learn a lot that way as well about what looks like a good grant, what doesn't. They give you a lot of specific things to look for. So even that process can be a really good learning experience as well. And then the other thing I want to do is just really give a shout out to Laura and Katie. I mean, to the people in our office. Laura, in terms of identifying grants and helping you get it. Katie, for helping you manage it once you get one. I have found the I have lived through more than one set of people working in that office, and we are, I mean, we are in great hands now. So I'll leave it at that.
Now, Kerry, you're up. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks so much, Laura, for inviting me to be part of this, and I'm excited to share some perspectives from the humanities. So my specific field is German studies and Jewish studies. So I'm coming to you from that sort of area of the humanities, from the languages. I was inspired a little bit by Carolyn. I hadn't planned to say anything that went back as far as my graduate student days, but I definitely have a grant seeking history that precedes my time at Gettysburg. And I went and dug up some names of those things that I could mention too. For me, in the humanities, I'm in a field where I think we're pretty book focused. And so my grants often sort of cycle relating to the various book projects that I'm doing. And that did include my dissertation when I applied for international grants in particular that would take me abroad to do research in foreign countries. And so at one point I did apply for and get a Fulbright research grant to Germany to do research that I declined because I got a grant that had a higher level of funding for the same year when I wanted to be abroad doing research. And that was funded by the Leo Baeck Institute in London, which is an institute for the study of German Jewish culture. So, and it was also funded by the Studienstiftung, which is a big foundation in Germany. So that was sort of an earlier phase in my grant application process. Since coming to Gettysburg, every time I have a new book project, I go for as many grants as I can think of. But the ones I've been most successful with have been the ones that have been very field specific. So as Laura mentioned, the NEH has a very low funding rate, less than 16%. But the ones in my field, I feel as if I clearly have a better shot at being funded for the projects that I'm doing. So I was really excited when I got one of the major grants in my field when I was working on my first book, and that helped me also take a full year of pre-tenure leave. And that grant in particular also led me to another book project by connecting with those networks and the people who were funding the project, and at the Grant Foundation, the Leo Baeck Institute in New York, I was able to reach out to all of the other people who had received the grant and get in touch with them and organize a workshop for them. And then I'm also co-editing a volume of essays by people who received that grant. So that's something that's been especially exciting and meaningful. Is actually got another book project out of getting a grant that I had for a different book project. I also, I'm currently on sabbatical working on what I'm thinking of as my second book. And that one is the one that I most recently sort of went grant seeking for. And I applied for 7 grants, including some NEH grants, and received 2 of them. So that's not such a bad return rate. But the ones I got are smaller grants, but still really exciting for my project, partly because as Carolyn mentioned, and as Laura mentioned too, the grants sort of give credibility to the project. They'll end up helping me with publishers. And one of the things that I wanted to say quite loudly, at least in my field, is that a grant proposal is not so radically different than a book proposal. The content, a lot of what you're trying to demonstrate, the significance of the project, why people should care, why it matters, it's the same thing you're trying to demonstrate to a publisher. So making that case becomes all the more simple when you already have a narrative crafted to detail that process or your thought process. And it often actually helps me sort of distill what I'm thinking. It's sort of the first step in thinking about the project. And then later I'm going back at the book proposal stage and reassessing. But that grant proposal often gives me sort of a first basis for summarizing the project and really thinking about the heart of it. One thing that I wanted to say in terms of how the grants have impacted my research is that sometimes the directions that the foundations are going or the interests that they're serving end up then becoming more prominent in my research, which is sort of an interesting way of thinking about it. But for example, the current book I'm writing is a biography, and because I won a grant in Holocaust studies, I made sure to include a whole chapter on the Holocaust in the book, which is something that I'm not sure I would have done otherwise, but beginning all the way at the proposal stage, I had that idea, and then it just became part of the project. In COVID times, as Katie knows in particular, I've had to really reconfigure my travel grant money that I would have used to go abroad to go do research in archives. But in a way, it's kind of impacted the project in exciting ways that I could not have anticipated. I've been able to hire research assistants, translators, and from languages that I do not speak. And I'm also very excited. Most recently, I decided to add some custom maps made by a cartographer to my book project. So all of that is stuff that I was able to sort of first think of because I had grant money to spend. One thing that I haven't heard anyone say yet is that I served on the Gettysburg RPD committee at one point, and when Gettysburg internal funding is looking at grant applications, they also want to see that people have applied for external grants, even if they haven't always won them. But like the process of seeking grants outside the institution shows, gives Gettysburg all the more reason to give you internal funding support. So that was something that I thought was important and something that I can then emphasize if I'm also going to Gettysburg for additional funding for my project. And I can't emphasize enough what Carolyn said about the opportunities that have resulted from my different grants that I've had, the professional networks that I've been able to establish, the invitations that I've gotten to give talks, lectures, networks of colleagues that I collaborate with on completely different projects. A lot of that has emerged from the grant sort of networks that I became part of by getting these grants and the foundations. So all of that is to say, I think of grant seeking as a really important part of my sort of way of staying active in my field. And I'm happy and excited to continue to do that every time I have a project that is sort of book sized. But the one thing I do want to close with, Laura asked a question about mistakes that we'd made in the process. And I think in my most recent grant application cycle, I think I made the mistake of calling my book a short book and sort of played down the overall significance of the book. Whereas I think I should have emphasized it sort of on its own terms, what it was doing, not what it wasn't doing. It might not be a field direction changing book, but it makes its contribution in its own way. And I think that the funders of the project saw that clearly outlined in the grant proposals, but I probably should not have ever used the term like short, regardless of the length of it. It is what it is. And yeah, that's about all I wanted to say. And I'm really glad to be here and support anyone who wants to apply for grants, because the Gettysburg team has been so great in supporting me.
Thanks, Kerry. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Hakim.
Thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Friday. Thank you all for joining us. The weather looks very nice outside, and so I myself would prefer to be outside instead of in this Zoom call. No offense to anybody here, but so I'll try to be terse so I can get outside very quickly. I'm in Africana studies primarily, also in peace and justice studies, education, public policy, all that to say that my interests straddle several subfields, which is exciting because I get to apply for different kinds of things, but it can also be a bit frustrating because maybe I stretch myself too thin and I'm like, there's many options, what should I apply for? So to frame my grant seeking, I would first say that I am very risk averse generally in life. And so I'm very protective of my time. It means that I do not apply for grants a whole lot. I applied for a Fulbright for my pre-tenure leave and I didn't get it. I got to be an alternate, which is a recipient. If they get it and they turn it down, then they will choose you. And of course, many people do not turn down awards. And so I didn't get it, and it took so much out of me to write it. that I said that, I said, oh, I'm done, never again. I'm over with grant writing. I must really thank the Provost's office and in providing professional development, because I do my research in my home country of Trinidad. And so the US dollar goes a really long way in Trinidad, and of course in many parts of the world. And so I was able to do really rich, textured work in Trinidad with the support from the Provost's office. That in combination with my risk aversion means that I wasn't just looking for any grants, right? And so here came COVID. COVID stranded myself and many of us at home. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my deepened depression? I will throw myself into applying for some grants. And Laura's office, I cannot praise that office enough. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. From reading drafts to giving feedback to helping with the budget. If I could take some money from the grant and pay Laura, I would do it. I would do it. But I don't want to run afoul of any sort of tax evasion and finance laws. But really, Laura's office has been so helpful to me. So I applied for a Spencer grant. Was my first time applying, and I got it. And I think it's the first time anybody at the college has gotten the Spencer grant. It's for a project that will last 2 years. It's called Decolonial Peace and Justice Education, a transatlantic study of 4 Afrocentric youth-based organizations, and a mouthful. It will take me to Ghana, Brazil, Jamaica, and Georgia in the south of the United States. And I will spend 3 to 4 months at each research site. I'm very excited about it. And I'm waiting to hear from 4 other grants. That's how prolific my grant writing was during the age of depression during COVID. And so the thing about applying for so many grants is that, so one, it's exciting, but 2, I'm waiting because I want to defer my sabbatical, because many countries I want to go to, some of their COVID rates are very high, and vaccine rollout is certainly far behind that of the United States. But some grants, if I were to get them, they're not going to allow me to defer. So that's why I'm waiting to find out. And if I get some of those grants and they say, yes, you've gotten it, I'm going to take my sabbatical. But some of them are amenable to me deferring. So you should also look at that and also consider that when you're applying for certain grants. Some tips. When I got turned down for the Fulbright, I decided to, I'm like, okay, I want an inside look at your process. So I signed up to be a reviewer within education and Fulbright, and that was so helpful. I signed up for 3 years being a reviewer. I had to read tons. It's a lot of free labor, but it was good. I was able to see the inside, like, okay, so these are your criteria that you used for deciding, at least for the first round. So that was very helpful when I decided to apply for another Fulbright, which I'm waiting to hear back. And of course, they're one of the latest ones to let you know. So that's very helpful. Another helpful tip was, apart from letting Laura in her office read drafts, I also asked one of my mentors, who has been a winner of lots of grants and also sat on committees. And she was able to she just ripped it apart. I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want, right? And I made sure I took out the jargon without making the proposal sound reductionist. Because many different types of people are reading this, and so it can't be jargon laden. And not that mine was, but there were some things in there that she was like, oh, you're gonna take this out. So that feedback was really instrumental. I probably wrote, God knows, probably 12, 15 drafts of just one proposal. So be prepared to do that, to get to the point where you're really happy with it. And maybe you're better writer than me, and maybe you can write it in one go and you're done with it. But I had to really write, and in writing so many times, I was really able to refine my ideas and make sure the methodology was quite robust and creative, right? I think that combination is quite compelling, making sure it's robust, but also innovative. So what else I want to share? I also went to each grant page and I looked up former winners, and I looked up their titles. And then I kind of Googled them online just to see what is the range of their publications. And I was like, oh, so this is the ambit of what these fellowships, these grants are looking for. So that was helpful in helping me also to sort of frame, because each time I applied for a different grant, I had to do a bit of tweaking. I couldn't just pick up the same thing and send it to them. Right? Some want 5 pages, some want 2 pages, and it's the same project that I either have to expand or contract according to their needs. Laura also provided me with copies of course, folks had given express permission, those from our campus who had won some of these grants. I took a look at successful proposals. That's also very helpful. We have a repository of those, and so you should definitely rely on those. What I didn't think of doing that somebody just did to me was that they emailed me 2 days ago and they're like, "Hi, Dr. Williams, I saw your name on the Spencer Foundation website. Could you send us your winning proposal?" And I was like, wow, that's pretty creative. And so I am going to share it with them, because to me, I am all about, the important work that we're doing. And if they want to do important work too, I want to help them, right? Just like Laura and my mentors helped me with my proposal. So I'm totally willing to send my proposal. So you all should do that, right? If you're applying for a grant, look up the past winners and write them and say, do you have any counsel, any advice? Congratulations. Could you share your proposal? I mean, they could say no, but you would never know until you ask, right? And I think that's all I want. Oh, one more thing. So when it comes to budget, keep this in mind. So some grants will cover your salaries. I'm taking a year sabbatical, which means I'm losing half my salary here at the college, right? Which is unfortunate because I have lots of student loans. So that's a stressor. But some grants will cover your salary or some part thereof. Keep in mind that is also taxable, so you have to pay taxes on that. One potential way of circumventing that is that you can decide to itemize lots of your expenses on site. You pay for those, and then you can seek reimbursement. In that way, you would accrue to yourself more of the money from the grant versus it covering salary and then it being taxed. That may not work for all fields and all persons and all grants, but just wanted to tell you that little tidbit because it's not really written anywhere. I kind of stumbled upon that. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hakim. And I'm going to turn it over to our Division 3 representative, Ryan Kearney.
Okay. Well, I have to pick on Laura for making me go after Hakim. It's kind of a hard act to follow. I was actually teaching in a tent next to him in the fall, and I could see my students like listening in on his lecture a little bit. It was like, oh, I got to, bring the A game now. So I have been applying to grants since my graduate school days. It's very common within my subdiscipline within biology, and it started with a lot of smaller grants, especially for international field work, in order to go to the tropics primarily and do different types of collections. And then since coming to the college, I've applied to 4 different NSFs, and I've gotten 1. So it's worse than the average that Laura mentioned at the beginning, at least for me personally. But that one really did help me a lot professionally and maintain some very valuable collaborations, and started new collaborations that I've managed to maintain for the last 7-8 years now, I guess, and has really been transformational for my research. I also applied for and got a Fulbright to go do some work in Sri Lanka, which was extremely valuable to me, and allowed me to do new things and different things with my research than I would have been possible. And then have served on NSF panels, which is extremely helpful for grantsmanship and for getting a sense of what reviewers are looking for. And as sort of funding begets funding, it put us on the radar for a foundation, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And after a long and initially somewhat awkward on my end, because I didn't know that this was actually a conversation about them funding us, we got a very large grant from the Moore Foundation, which was a $1 million grant that was for 3 years originally. Because of COVID, it's now stretching out to 5 years. With 3 other partner institutions, and we have 2 postdocs that are hired. And that was kind of a pilot on their end. They've now extended their aquatic symbiosis initiative to $140 million, which is not is not coming to us, but is making a huge impact on our field. And it's been incredibly rewarding to be part of that conversation and to talk to people around the world who are working on different aspects of these biological phenomena and finding commonalities across very wide disparate approaches to studying the life sciences and to come up with new and very exciting ideas. And so it's given me a lot of liberty to try some harebrained, high risk, potentially high reward experiments that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to try. And like the grant searching, a lot of them don't work, but occasionally you hit pay dirt, and it's really rewarding to make those types of discoveries. And in working with a lot of partner institutions, be them museums or R1 universities or just other schools around the country, I really have come to appreciate the work that Laura and Katie do within development. I mean, it's just so rare in comparison to these other institutions to have somebody on the other end of the Zoom call that is going to actually be actively helping you move the ball forward, as opposed to having some bureaucratic hurdles that you need to just overcome. So I guess I'll just leave it there. Division 3, though, for the grant seeking world, I guess one last thing to end is that I know we have a lot of thought in terms of NSF or maybe NIH or these other conventional government funding agencies, but there's a lot of additional pots of money out there that are really worth exploring, including statewide, the Kaufman Foundation. I actually have a student right now who's really good and has applied for a Sigma Xi grant in native research. And it's not, huge pots of money, but they're really great. They're really prestigious, especially for students, to encourage them to think about it early on as a way of having a very prominent line on their CV that'll help them with graduate school applications.
Thanks so much, everyone. And I want to, something that Ryan said made me think of this is that, I can't downplay enough I can't state enough that, this is such a positive thing for the reputation of Gettysburg College as well, to seek external funding. And I was on a webinar with like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and a program officer from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation was speaking, and she said, one of her favorite institutions to work with is a team at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. And I mean, this is the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which is just huge. And so it was a really, really cool experience for me to hear that as well. So anyway, all this to say that we really hope that folks will consider external funding as they have the chance to do that, and that we can be a help to you in that process. And I think what you've heard your colleagues say today is that they're willing to help you as well and to encourage you to do that. So at this time, I just want to, I think we have like 9 minutes left, so I'm wanting to open it up for questions. We're really thorough in our presentation. Oh, Alicia?
Hi, so great job, very interesting topics and lots of interesting. Grant funding is something that I find very intimidating. I think I might be a little risk adverse, like Hakim mentioned. I'm a little external grant seeking, but perhaps I was wondering if you could talk, and this might be more a question for Laura, maybe others can chime in, about just sort of where do I even get started thinking about the kind of research grants that might fit my research. So I'm a qualitative researcher who does interviews, and it's sort of small scale. So I can't imagine a grant of like $1 million or something. I don't even know what I would do with that. But where do I start looking? Like, are there online repositories that I should just start browsing through, and just even thinking about what I might find funding for some of these projects?
Yeah, Alicia, that's a great question. And there's two things I would say to start. Sometimes people don't like to do this, but one of the great ways to start is to think about what you need money for, because that really does help you think about the scale that you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for a $6,000 grant, or maybe you're looking for a $100,000 grant, depending on, your budget. And, there's very effective small grants, like the American Association of University Women has small publication grants. The Franklin Research Grant is a small $6,000 grant. And so that's one way to start thinking about it. Another way would be to look at the CVs of other people in your field that you really respect, that are really close to your discipline, and see who they've been funded by.
Oh, that's very helpful, Laura. I hadn't, the CV thing, I hadn't even considered, but that's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, and there are databases, but you know, I don't know if I'd start with that. Kind of overwhelming sometimes. Other questions? Well, if anyone thinks of anything, please feel free to get in touch with me, with anyone that's spoken. We're all really happy to help and excited to continue to bring in external funding to the college.
Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for the speakers today. Congratulations on your grants, and it's so inspiring. So we will put this video up for other people who couldn't make it, and Laura will be very, very busy this summer because everybody will want to get grants. So please come back next week. Jim Udden talking about Chinese cinema, and enjoy the weekend. It's supposed to be nice.